Okay, we're going to continue on with the reproductive system by talking about spermatogenesis and spermiogenesis. Okay, and I also wanted to clear up that it's homolog. Okay, I decided to check from our last lecture. So here are the three things that we're going to do. So we're going to define the different processes and then describe the stages of spermatogenesis. Okay, so spermatogenesis is where you produce or where we produce or where men produce sperm cells. Spermiogenesis is the process that causes those sperm cells to become more mature. Now, when it comes to spermatogenesis, there are several stages, and this whole process takes about 64 days, so about 9 weeks. Okay, and so what happens is we have something called a spermatogonium, and it divides into two spermatocytes. So we've got this. Let me put on my little highlighter here. And so what happens is, whoops, that's not what I wanted. I wanted a laser pointer. So we've got the spermatogonium. It goes through mitosis, and it becomes a spermatocyte. Now notice here, it's got two sets of chromosomes, and then when it divides, both of these have two sets of chromosomes. Okay? Now one of those spermatocytes will then divide into what we call secondary spermatocytes through the process of meiosis. Okay, and so notice now, instead of we go from two sets of chromosomes to each of these has one set of chromosomes, each of the secondary spermatocytes. Those secondary spermatocytes divide one more time through meiosis into spermatids. Okay, spermatids, excuse me. And each of those continues to have one set of chromosomes. Okay, remember there are usually, when all things are going according to plan, 23 chromosomes. Okay, each person, most people, have two sets of 23, so we have 46 total chromosomes. Now, just to remind you, in case you learned this and forgot, or you've never learned this, when we talk about mitosis, that's a regular cell division that ultimately produces two cells, right? So we go from the spermatogonium to producing two spermatocytes. And then we've got meiosis, and that's a process where we take one cell and we ultimately end up with 4 cells. And each of those 4 cells has one set as opposed to two sets of chromosomes. Now, when this goes on, we've got sustentacular cells, and they're also known as Sertoli cells, okay? And what they do is they surround the developing sperm cells, and ultimately what they do is they secrete stuff, and these will either cause sperm to be produced or sperm to die. Okay, and the sustentacular cells, one of their other functions is that they produce or form, like it says, a barrier between the sperm cells and the blood. Okay, and so then we also have what are called interstitial or Leydig cells, and these are the cells that produce testosterone. When testosterone is released, that is the signal for spermatogenesis, which is what we've got here. Okay, so spermatogenesis goes from that spermatogonium until we get to the spermatids. Okay, these are mature sperm cells, and so spermiogenesis, we take these spermatids and ultimately produce mature sperm or spermatozoa. All right, so hormones are definitely involved with this. And so as we talked about with the last lecture, hypothalamus releases GnRH, which is stimulated by the release of dopamine. GnRH releases or causes the release of FSH and LH. LH causes those interstitial cells to release testosterone. The FSH causes sustentacular cells to release something called antigen binding protein. Ultimately, what happens is we have high levels of testosterone. This causes inhibin to be released, which prevents the release of more FSH, which prevents the release of even more testosterone. So we can see that here, right? So hypothalamus releases GnRH that causes the release of LH. LH, so we're going this way here. So LH causes those interstitial cells to release testosterone. Okay. FSH causes the release of inhibin and androgen binding protein. Ultimately, this causes the release of, this inhibits the release of more GnRH, and inhibin also prevents the release of FSH. Okay, so inhibin prevents the release of FSH, and then high concentrations of testosterone also inhibit the release of GnRH, FSH, and LH. Okay, so ultimately, it's helps keep this in balance, right? We don't want too much testosterone. We don't want too little. And so when we have high concentrations of testosterone, that causes the release of inhibin, and just testosterone in and of itself will inhibit the release of FSH and LH. So with that, can you do these 3 things? All right, just a few more lectures to go for the day and then really for the semester.